And in Iraq, the Shia are the majority by 60%, and basically populated all the land from Baghdad to Basra in the south there. And so it was of the utmost importance, Ronald Reagan and his team thought, to contain that Iranian revolution. Well, according to the King, Abdullah, talking to our State Department, now look what you've done. You've given Iraq to Iran on a golden platter. No. I'm used to hearing the cliche silver platters, giving things on silver platters. A golden platter, that's nice. And I guess he is a Saudi king, and so maybe he's just used to having golden platters. Maybe it was a mistake in the translation. But he's absolutely right, that as soon as the decision was carried out and the Ba'ath government fell, it was Saddam Hussein's government was primarily a minority Sunni Arab government, and he was ruthlessly secular and fascistic, and had no friendship whatsoever, nothing but enmity with people like Osama bin Laden and the radical jihadist types. But he was the minority, and that's why he needed foreign support. Without foreign support in the 90s, he really only controlled, on the eve of the Iraq War that maybe some of you believed in at the time, he controlled Tikrit, Fallujah, and Baghdad. That was it. We had no fly and no drive zones across the north and the south of that country. Kurdistan was already an autonomous region for 10 years. And by invading that helpless country and overthrowing that minority dictatorship, we simply empowered whoever was the most powerful among the Shia Arabs. And those turned out to be the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, who were the Iraqi traitors who'd been living in Iran for 30 years, who in fact had passed their loyalty test by torturing Iraqi prisoners of war as they lived in exile in Iran. And it was the Hakim family, their clan, and their army, the Badr Brigade. These are the men that George Bush's war put in power. And when you look at who rules Iraq right now, Nouri al-Maliki, our guy, the prime minister, for now, they still can't form a government after the elections last March, but Maliki is at least for now still the prime minister. He's from the Dawa party, and particularly the traitor faction that went to Iran during the Iran-Iraq war. And now Muqtada al-Sadr is another of the three most powerful leaders of the three most powerful factions among the Shia. And he was always the Iraqi nationalist, the Arab nationalist. Even though he's a religious figure, he always strongly criticized the Supreme Islamic Council, i.e. George Bush's plan to create a federal Iraq with southern Iraq in alliance with Iran, and said, no, we're Iraqis first. And, you know, there's the Arab-Persian split and what have you, and Muqtada al-Sadr really strongly rejected Iranian influence. But he also rejected the American occupation. So the Americans made him the enemy and targeted him and his Mahdi army over and over and over again, even though they're the most natural power faction in terms of grassroots, bottom-up support among the Shia, and attacked him and attacked him and attacked him, and finally drove him into Iran, quite literally, into their arms. He now studies at Qom, where that atom bomb factory isn't. That's where he is now working on attaining his higher religious rank of Ayatollah, and will very likely one day be the Ayatollah of the Islamic Republic of Iraq, in a strong and permanent alliance with Iran. And that's all thanks to the United States of America. Now, they want to try to pretend that it was the Sunni-based insurgents who were somehow being supported by Iran. They were trying to figure out how to change that narrative. Let's see. The Sunni insurgents who are fighting us and the Iranian-backed groups, because they're the Iranian-backed groups, how can we pretend that the Iranians are backing them? Well, we'll just pretend that every roadside bomb in Iraq from now on must have been made in Iran. Apparently, Arabs are way too stupid to figure out how to mix copper in with their explosives and create some armor-piercing homemade landmines. And so from now on, we'll change IEDs to EFPs, explosively formed penetrators. They were new, improved homemade landmines in Iraq. But we'll just pretend from now on, everyone in media and everyone in government will simply just assert that the presence of EFPs means that the Iranians are sending these bombs to kill our guys, that they're our enemy, even though we're fighting for them the whole time. It really is quite incredible to see years on end worth of propaganda complaining about and accusing Iran of their interference in Iraq, when we told Sadr no and Al-Hakim and the Supreme Islamic Council yes, and fought that whole time. In fact, the Iraq war logs about people being rounded up and turned over to Iraqi torturers, that's who they're talking about. The Badr Brigade, America and Iran's joint project in Iraq. To me, it's just insulting that they would pretend that Iran is our enemy there. Maybe they are, but we're their best friends there and have been since 2003. It's as simple as that. The Saudi king is absolutely right. We handed that country over to them on a golden platter. All right, now, another major lie, another major part of the narrative about Iran is that they support terrorism. Well, I suppose that's true, but I think it might be beneficial if we were to discriminate a little bit. Ever since the beginning of this war on terrorism, our government and our media organs have worked so hard to conflate all non-state armed groups in the world into some giant Islamo-fascist caliphate out to take over the world. But really, Al-Qaeda wasn't the Taliban. The Taliban were trying to give up Osama bin Laden before 9/11 ever happened, and they were willing to give him up after it happened. He was nothing but trouble to them. Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were not the same thing. And they're certainly not the same as Hamas and Hezbollah in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. They're not the same as the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade and the Muslim Brotherhood and the, you name your private group of Islamic fighters in the world. They're not all working together, and in fact, many of them are enemies. There was a group of Al-Qaeda type guys tied to Al-Qaeda, as they say, very similar in ideology in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas killed them. They launched a major offensive and killed every single one of those guys. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the bin Laden's right-hand man, put out a message after 2006 denouncing Hamas and their leadership, who they are Sunni Arabs, co-religionists and the same ethnicity and so forth. But he denounced them for wanting to be a state, for participating in the democratic process, for negotiating with the great Satan Israel, etc., etc. They are the bitterest of enemies. The Ayatollahs in Iran and their friends Hezbollah in Lebanon are the exact opposite of Osama bin Laden. And as Michael Scheuer, the former head of the CIA's bin Laden unit, put it, the Iraq war was the hoped for but unexpected gift to bin Laden in completing the radicalization of the Muslim world and getting rid of one of bin Laden's worst enemies, Saddam Hussein. Overthrowing the Ayatollahs would be next on his list. Number one order of business. So when people say Iran supports terrorism, fine, but ask yourself if Hamas and Hezbollah are a threat to you or have ever been proven to be a threat to you. Hamas and Hezbollah are basically liberation movements. Hezbollah never existed until Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 and stayed. They were originally welcomed to come and expel the PLO, but then they stayed, and the Party of God came into existence as the grassroots militia in opposition to them. And of course, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO of Yasser Arafat, controlled the Gaza Strip and the West Bank after 1967, and it was Israel, deliberately, their Mossad that created, with the help of Yassin, I forgot the guy's first name, but Yassin, the terrorist, they created Hamas deliberately to be a right-wing, conservative, religious alternative to those pinkos in the PLO. That's where Hamas comes from in the first place. I guess we don't have too much time to delve into how they came to be the monopoly power such as it is in the Gaza Strip prison now, but let's just say it was American and Israeli intervention trying to stop them that made it that way back in 2006. Again, they're just not Al-Qaeda. So if Iran supports Hamas and Hezbollah, my question is, so what? You can answer that however you like. And by the way, Hezbollah really were the great innovators in suicide bombings, but they haven't done a single one since Israel withdrew from Lebanon. That was it. Their campaign of suicide bombing, which is obviously a horrific form of terrorism, the most horrific, was to end an occupation. not to invade Israel and conquer it and drive the Israelis into the sea or any such thing. It's horrible, but it's defensive in nature. And now, I should also mention that the United States of America supports terrorism in Iran, and this has been shown time and time again by the reporting of the likes of Andrew Coburn, Seymour Hersh, of course, in the New Yorker, my girl, Larissa Alexandrovna, in Raw Story, particularly her work on the Mujahideen al-Khalq, which is a communist terrorist group. They're like the Heaven's Gate cult. Remember Bowen T. and the suicide in that mansion in LA a few years back? That's basically the craziness of this Mujahideen al-Khalq that mixes Islam and Marxism somehow and blows people up. They used to work for the Ayatollah Khomeini and helped him with the revolution in '79, and then in fact killed Americans back in the '70s in Iran for him. And then they got kicked out of Iran. They worked for Saddam Hussein, murdering people for a while. And then after the Iraq War in 2003, we inherited them. And the CIA and especially the military have been using the Mujahideen al-Khalq to set off bombs and kill people inside Iran. We also support the very al-Qaeda-like Salafist, Takfiri, bin Ladenist ideology, that radical Sunni ideology, and as our government likes to say, ties between groups, Baluchi separatists and terrorists called Jandala, who round up police and soldiers and execute them, set off bombs and kill people. There's another communist group up in Kurdistan called PJAK, which Seymour Hersh wrote quite a bit about how the United States arms and funds them. And in fact, in Larissa's recent piece at Raw Story about one of the WikiLeaks and a discussion between the Israelis and the Americans about supporting, waging covert action in Iran and supporting dissident groups. In the memo, it's a little bit vague, but she got a quote from Robert Baer, the former CIA officer, who absolutely interpreted that to mean supporting Jandala and PJAK and the MEK, and he's called it the Mad Max approach, which means just blowing things up, trying to destabilize the place and get us closer to regime change. No real plan, just hurt people and hope things work out. By the way, it doesn't seem to work very well. After all, how do we feel when somebody commits a terrorist act in our country? We turn against our own government, even if they're the ones who provoked it? No, of course, we rally around our leaders when we're attacked the same as anybody else does in their countries. And in fact, another thing in that memo is not just support for Jandala and MEK and PJAK terrorists, but support for democracy movements and student movements and the Greens and the Reformers. Well, does anyone here think that having the CIA bankroll student pro-democracy movements in Iran is beneficial to those movements? Or does that simply make it the easiest thing in the world for the Ayatollahs to say, look, anybody who says they're against us, we all know they're on the CIA payroll. They don't mean what they say. They're working for our enemies. It only undermines them. And you might ask whether maybe our Pentagon is actually smart enough to be doing that on purpose. Because it seems like the policy all along has been that the moderates in Iran are our enemies. When Khatami and Rafsanjani, two so-called moderates, because they had friendly faces and were willing to talk with the Americans, weren't so fire-breathing, they just ignored Khatami and Rafsanjani, and they focused always on the Ayatollah Khomeini, because after all, he looks and his name sounds a lot like Khomeini, and he's not quite as fire-breathing, but he's definitely scarier looking than Khatami. But then came 2005, and George Bush came out on the eve of the election in July 2005, and he said, you Iranians better not elect the right-winger. And so they all turned out and voted for Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And now, the Ayatollah Khomeini, he seems like a pretty reasonable cat compared to Loudmouth and the khaki jacket. So now they rather focus on Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and pretend that he is the power in Iran. In fact, we all know that that's not true. The country is ruled by the Ayatollah. He's, as Juan Cole compares him to our Interior Ministry. In most countries, the Interior Ministry means the secret police. Ours is the national parks, like that. Our secret police, we call them other things. But he compares the president of Iran to the interior minister. He's not in charge really of the economy. He's not in charge of the military, foreign policy. If he wanted to make nuclear weapons all day long, that wouldn't mean a thing to the real power in that state. But he makes for a worse bad guy on TV. It's easier to say he's a Hitler, as Benjamin Netanyahu calls him,